is it good for? Well, putting bums on cinema seats, for one thing. Britain has fought a lot of wars. You could say that without that back catalogue of conflict to make movies about, the British film industry would never have really got off the ground.
Why us?
Because we're real.
We Brits have managed to make enemies of most of the world at one time or another, which is not big or clever, but it does mean that British filmmakers have been spoilt for choice with stories of private grief, major ingenuity and general calamity to parade at the picture houses. The tales are legion of bravery and stupidity, determination and sacrifice, stiff upper lips,
I am Major General Wynne Kennedy,
and disquiet in the ranks. So synchronise watches, chocks away. I have in my hand a piece of paper, and it says, this is the story of the British war film.
Aircraft in sight, bearing green 17, now angle of sight 20. Open fire! Long gone!
The British reputation as a nation defined by war certainly has something to do with being on the winning side in the two biggest and bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century. But it might also have something to do with the power of cinema.
You're wondering what it's all about, and I can't tell you because I don't know myself.
Hollywood grew out of westerns. That's something we don't have. We didn't have cowboys. The only thing that we do have is wartime subjects, which I think we do very well indeed, if I may say so.
When you think about Britain at war, the images that spring to mind probably come from British war films. Who won World War II? Wasn't it Commander Jack Hawkins, Pilot Dickie Attenborough?
It's heaven, isn't it?
And Captain Johnny Mills struggling through the desert in search of a cool, refreshing beer.
Worth waiting for.
In fact, many of the stars of the greatest British war films did do their bit for real, and that shows on the screen.
I always did hate the sight of blood.
We've had it, and I'd rather jump than fry.
David Niven was a commando. Richard Todd was a paratrooper who fought on D-Day.
I'm going into attack.
These were people who'd been through the things they were acting.
Whether it's films made during wartime to help stiffen the resolve of a nation battling against the odds, or those basking in triumph in the years immediately after our victory, you can generally tell when you're watching a British war film, as, unlike what often comes out of Hollywood, it usually keeps hold of some kind of reality.
I suppose it's very difficult for everyone else who's never experienced war to actually make that judgment. But every so often, I think, yes, some films really do hit the mark.
Stand by to come in your order when I tell you.
Maybe the greatest and certainly the most iconic of the films made in the 50s, which recast the events of World War II as modern-day heroic legend, was The Dam Busters. This film reeks of Britishness. In fact, if they're ever looking for a new national anthem...
It's one of those crazy tunes, isn't it? The Dam Busters tunes. How's it going? Let me get it right now. I think... Da, 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 da. And you've just got to accept that that's one of the most evocative tunes.
50s war movies are really interesting because they do make a deliberate effort to say that the war was a good and right thing to have done. Like the Dam Busters, for instance, is unapologetic about how heroic the guys were.
What is it you want? I've got an idea for destroying the Ruhr dams. The effects on Germany would be enormous. I know all that. I've read the report.
Dam Busters is a wonderful marriage of science and good old-fashioned bravery and guts, which the Brits like to think was their sort of brand.
And here's the science bit.
3, 2, 1.
Inventor Barnes Wallace's plan was that bombs could skim over the water and blow dirty great holes in the dam walls.
You see? It wasn't a fluke. It works.
The person that came up with this idea of bouncing the bombs
spent a lot of time at the seaside skipping stones. Only a guy would, yeah. Bombs, sure. You know, women, no, never.
The bomb's delivery boys were a hand-picked team of the RAF's finest. Playing the mission's leader, Wing Commander Guy Gibson, was genuine war hero Richard Todd.
Brakes off!
All the leading actors were ex-service. They knew how to salute and how to march and how to stand and how to take an order and how to give an order.
All set? Yes, sir.
And they knew what all those blokes must have felt during the raid.
Good luck.
For added authenticity, grainy footage of the bomb being tested for real was incorporated into the film.
Whenever you saw the bouncing bomb, it was always as if you were seeing through a pair of binoculars. That explained why the quality of film was different, because the original film was pretty dire, pretty scratchy.
Even though the war had ended more than 10 years before, each frame of the film had to be doctored to preserve military secrets. That's why the bomb looked so blobby. Really, it was barrel-shaped.
The whole ethos of the Dam Busters was, it's a job, let's get on with it, which is what it was actually like in war.
Enemy coast ahead.
And that business-like approach was employed in recreating the raid itself, when 19 Lancaster bombers targeted 3 dams in the Ruhr Valley, deep in Germany's industrial heartland. There's no music, no histrionics, just the hum of the engines creating pure tension.
It went very slowly, and I know that because RAF pilot took me in a Harrier along the route over the Moerner Dam. And we flew at the speed. Well, not quite. He said he couldn't really get down to that speed. It was a bit difficult.
Gunners ready. Coming up, spam.
And you realised there'd be Akak coming up, and you were almost ambling towards this objective. Must have been terrifying.
Bomb gun.
The raid was a success.
It's gone. Look.
But there's more to the film than the celebration of a daring mission accomplished. OK, so nobody mentions all those German civilians who drowned when the dams came crashing down. But the film does find time to grieve over the losses on the British side.
The attacks were pressed home from a very low level with great determination and coolness in the face of fierce resistance. 8 of the Lancasters are missing.
They just cut round these empty rooms that all those people are dead now. And it's the best death I've ever seen in a movie. You don't see it happening, but you know, because those rooms are empty, that those people aren't alive anymore.
The Dam Busters set out to tell an amazing tale in a largely unsensationalised way. And, 50 years on, that approach to committing war stories to celluloid is still being followed. United 93 saw a British director taking an American story and making a very British film about it. People may dispute whether the war on terror is actually a war as such. But what's undeniable is that United 93 sits squarely within a tradition of unflinchingly realistic British war films.
If an American had made this movie, it would have been patriotic and flag-waving, but it's been done in a very subtle way, that there is no front line, there's no battle, it's just the story of people that are caught up in something that has effectively been deemed a war.
The movie is an attempt to recreate the events on board the one hijacked airliner that failed to hit its target on September the 11th, 2001.
Open the door and nobody will be hurt.
And it made the interior of that plane seem like a battlefield.
The whole purpose of that film was to look at 9/11 afresh as an event and to allow it to have its true meanings rather than the ones that one particular part of the political spectrum has given to it. What would be nice is for you to come back and see him come in.
Paul Greengrass is a man with a reputation for making films that bear an uncanny resemblance to stuff that happens when the cameras aren't there. He started his career documenting the real thing, shooting current affairs films for World in Action. Now he creates the action himself. But it always looks like the real thing.
Tom, I'm getting no response out of a United 93. No response at all.
That is quite a British thing to do. There's no strong American documentary realism tradition in the same way that there is in Britain.
His method was to buy a disused airliner, put it in Pinewood Studios and fill it with an intriguing cast.
Hi, my name is Sandy Bradshaw. I'm on United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco.
The film's stars are a mixture of real airline staff, actors chosen so that the audience don't recognise them, and the actual people who are at the centre of the events of 9/11.
When he tells me that, I then say, I want you to ground stop everybody.
Ben Sliney is the air traffic controller who ordered the grounding of all flights on September the 11th. In the film, he plays himself.
Listen, I'm not taking any more chances. We got stuff flying around we have no control over.
I chose people to play themselves because who would better know how an air traffic controller behaved than an air traffic controller? You were there, show us what happened. That's bound to be closer, more truthful, more realistic, if you like, than getting a bunch of actors to do it.
Shut off all the international from Europe, shut off South America, shut off the West Coast.
We're gonna shut down the entire country right now?
That's right. Listen, we're at war with someone.
Reality comes from saying less, good observation, and listening, rather than pointing fingers and wagging and shouting, let's roll, and that kind of stuff.
I'm gonna fly it. No one's gonna be okay.
What's in that yet?
You'd have to have been inside that plane to know what really happened in those hours. Nobody lived to tell that tale. But those words, let's roll, said to have been uttered by passenger Todd Beamer before storming the cockpit, have become part of the mythology of 9/11.
Guys, what are we waiting for? Let's roll. Come on, let's go already.
Let's Roll is at the heart of United 93. It's also at the heart of 9/11.
Let's go.
When you explore the drama with a clear eye, you're drawn irresistibly to the conclusion that it would be played as it was played.
What are we waiting for? Let's roll. Come on, let's go already.
Not least because would you want to announce to a group of people just down the gangway that you were coming?
The principal American films about 9/11 are not like this. Here, there's no stirring soundtrack or Hollywood-style heroics. This is a chaotic, claustrophobic scramble which ends abruptly. There's no explanation, no resolution, no moral message. But this drama documentary approach to conflict is nothing new. It was forged by war, the war that was meant to end all wars. In 1916, Geoffrey Malins and John McDowell made the Battle of the Somme.
What's extraordinary about that film is that it would have been shown in your local cinema with people whose relatives were over there in France actually seeing the action. That still comes as a shock.
Maybe that's why so many people went to see it. 20 million tickets were sold for this picture, more than for any other film in the history of British cinema. But what were they watching? Some of it was the battle itself. In fact, recent restoration of the footage has revealed the fighting raging in the distance on these hills.
There's the Battle of the Somme, the real Battle of the Somme going on in the background. Okay, the camera's a mile away, but there it is, and it's come to life through the restoration. So these ghosts have risen from the dead. It is really creepy.
But it wasn't all as straightforward as that.
It was presented to its audiences as a piece of verite cinema, but most of it was reenacted at a later date.
There's a famous moment, the up and over moment, where these troops are in the trench, they go up.
You actually see a man fall, which, if you were seeing it, would be a snuff movie, but apparently it was a soldier just falling, on command. This is really where it began. This is soldiers pretending to be soldiers in a film that shows you what happens to soldiers.
I think you could argue that the British documentary movement is one of Britain's major contributions to film history.
Those first attempts to use drama documentary to tell war stories were built on 25 years later in the pioneering work of Humphrey Jennings. Typical is Fires Were Started. It's a film about the London Blitz, filmed during the London Blitz, using the men and women who risked death every night to put out the flames.
You can see that these people are non-professionals, but not because they're bad actors, but because there's something so authentic about the way they speak.
Swing it round, Norris. Bring him away.
They feel totally at ease in front of the camera, and that is his genius.
Go down, Nico. Are you coming on? Go over down. You get down now.
The moment when the fireman, falls into the fire and the others realise what's happened to him. My God, it's devastating.
When you look at Humphrey Jennings's films now, they're not just pieces of propaganda. They're layered and complex, and they allow the voice of the common man.
John, you heard? No, what? Jacob's copped it. Copped it, baby. He's copped it, I tell you.
But Jennings was not the only innovator making waves in the cinema. In 1944, director Pat Jackson made an audaciously ambitious drama documentary about the war at sea.
Western Approaches is a movie that makes you really feel seasick when you watch it, because most of it was actually physically filmed in a very small lifeboat in the mid-Atlantic. Everybody in it, that was their real job. They were real merchant seamen, they were real Royal Navy men.
To tell the story of the bravery of merchant seamen facing the threat of U-boats, Jackson took his cast and crew out to sea, putting them in the same kind of danger depicted in the film. He loaded up a new-fangled Technicolor camera too, operated by legendary cinematographer Jack Cardiff.
I don't know who was mad enough to think of having a Technicolor camera. It was difficult with any camera. The fact was, in the middle of the war, any boat in the water was subject to being shot at by U-boats. We had one or two cases where we nearly got shot out of the water.
Torpedoes starboard! Here comes another one!
Western Approaches is an amazing film. There's something about using the real people that I don't think can be better.
During World War II, filmmakers like Jackson and Jennings presented stories of heroism and endeavour to help boost wartime spirits and steel our resolve in the face of attack. Once the war ended, that immediate need was gone, but after a few years, cinema-goers were ready to lap up tales of martial derring-do once more, but for a different reason. The 1950s was something of a golden age for the war movie, and many of these films peddled an almost instant nostalgia. They served to remind audiences in a grim and austere post-war Britain how well we'd done as a nation in what Mr. Churchill had assured us was our finest hour.
England was still fairly dispirited, and there was a nostalgia for the sort of stiff upper lip period we'd all been through. So therefore, most of the war films that were made at that period reflected a general satisfaction that we, A, had come through the war, and that, B, we'd done quite well against unbelievable adversity.
We wanted the adventure, and wow, did we get it with those films. They were absolutely marvelous.
The prison camp breakout story was all the rage in the 50s. Watch the Colditz story and the Wooden Horse, and you'd think the war had all been one big lark. When Nick Park and Aardman Animation gave us their contemporary take on the escape film, but with added plasticine in Chicken Run, he didn't mess much with the original formula. Which is, stick some plucky toffs who want to get back to Blighty behind barbed wire, have them guarded by some camp commandants, and let the japes unfold.
I think they were popular because they're about a small band of British people escaping. It's a very simple thing, a prison break movie, but in a wartime setting.
All right. It's easier, boy.
The Wooden Horse was the first of these that did incredibly well.
Hold it, James. Okay, John.
Well, The Wooden Horse was based on a real-life escape, whereby, in order to tunnel, they took out a wooden horse that you jumped over in a gym, and then where it was dropped, we started to dig and dug a tunnel.
Brian Forbes's real military service in the 40s had included time in the intelligence corps. He then spent much of the 50s running rings round Nazi guards on film sets.
Good luck, sir. See you after the war. Right.
Well, The Wooden Horse was one of many that took advantage of the amazing escapes that were effected from prisoner of war camps. I mean, notably in another film I was in called The Colditz Story.
Contingent.
That saw the infamous Colditz Castle prisoner of war camp recreated on a studio backlot. But this film would never have been made at all if the Germans had thought a little bit harder about their prison camp policy.
Los!
The Germans, of course, had made the huge mistake because they had put in one place all these very courageous gentlemen who had no other interest apart from how do we get out of this place and escape.
Colditz was for the elitist escapers. It was mostly the officer class that tried to escape.
Aren't you happy in your work? Don't worry, it's your turn next.
It does seem a little bit jolly public school, but then only officers qualified, and so it was natural that they should behave as old Etonians would have.
If you were ordering dinner at the Savoy, now, tonight, what would you kick off with?
Who's paying?
Oh, I am.
Smoked salmon and a little caviar.
I suppose some films were very much the celebration of the human spirit, keeping your pecker up, doing your bit.
It's only a dirty old prison camp.
And that comes out in The Colditz Story. There they are, being officers, being good-hearted and stalwart. It's the image people wanted of themselves.
It wasn't until celebrated director David Lean made his epic contribution that the prison camp movie got more serious.
By the time you get to the bridge on the River Kwai, you get a sense of the horror of it.
I'll count 3. If by the third count, you and your officers are not on their way to work, I'll give the order to fire.
It's one of those films that I suppose had to be made because of the brutality of what the Far East prisoners of war suffered.
British POWs had endured terrible hardship at the hands of their Japanese captors. And the famous theme tune aside, there was precious little jauntiness in this story based on real events of forced labour and divided loyalties.
David Lean's Bridge on the River Kwai is perhaps the quintessential British war movie. It's a prison camp movie, and you have Alec Guinness, who's this stiff upper-lipped colonel.
My name is Nicholson.
It's in Burma, and it's about the building of a bridge by British prisoners of war.
You see, the code specifically states that the...
In all the previous POW films, for example, the British officers never lose their character. They never lose their positive outlook, their knowledge that God's an Englishman. But what you see in that film is Alec Guinness gets brainwashed, effectively.
I realize how difficult it's going to be in this godforsaken place where you can't find what you need. But there's the challenge.
I beg your pardon, sir. You mean you really wanted to build a bridge?
You're not usually so slow in the uptake, Evans.
He then becomes involved in the building of the bridge, and it becomes a matter of pride that they do this job well. So suddenly you've got this guy who's incredibly patriotic and incredibly English helping the Japanese out. It's a bizarre twist to a story.
The bridge gets built, but saboteurs get to work too, rigging it with explosives. The film's key moment is the scene where Nicholson seems to come to his senses.
What have I done?
And seconds later is fatally wounded by shrapnel. With his customary perfectionism, Guinness rehearsed Nicholson's final moments again and again.
It's one of the great endings in all movie history.
You're never sure whether Alec Guinness deliberately falls on the plunger or whether he doesn't. He might have been trying to deactivate it, but in the end he dies and falls on it and blows up the bridge. So you're left with a question mark there.
It's an ambiguous ending, and the last line comes from one of his officers, played by James Donald.
Madness. Madness.
Filmmakers in the 50s who wanted to make movies about what we as a nation had been through during 6 years of conflict were almost spoilt for choice. Some of these stories beggared belief, like this one, Reach for the Sky, the story of an RAF ace called Douglas Bader. If he hadn't published his memoirs, viewers of this film might have thought they were having their legs pulled.
Wow. You know, this incredible character, this incredible man who was a show-off, was seen to be arrogant by many, and then he had this terrible accident, lost both his legs, went on to become a Second World War fighter ace.
John, I can't feel my legs.
Douglas Bader was played by Kenneth More, who shared some of his loud-mouthed, matey obstinacy.
He was brilliant because, you know, he showed the petulant side of getting well and overcoming injury and accepting what has happened and then moving it on to a different level.
Go on, be a sport. I'm getting my new legs soon and I must have somebody to dance with.
But I still don't know your name.
Douglas Bader.
And I'm Thelma Edwards.
This role just fitted him like a glove. He had the same reckless courage, if you like. I mean, he was never reticent in his opinions about people and so on.
But there was a darker side to Bader, the indomitable hero.
You know what you can do with your damn sticks now? No, I can manage. Don't be so touchy. I've got to fly again, old boy. Can't you understand that? I've simply got to.
Nice, sweet people could not achieve what he achieved.
Oh, darling.
I'm all right.
Let's go and have
I'm
some
all right, darling. It's just a question of balance.
He was unpleasant to people, but Kenny invested him with a bit more charm.
I believe he was at times pig-headed and arrogant.
Enemy aircraft ahead.
But for goodness sake, look what happened to him. Can't we forgive him a bit of pig-headedness and arrogance?
Through sheer force of will, Bader fought back from his terrible injuries to fly again. And that was the story 1950s cinema audiences wanted to see. They didn't want to hear about the difficult man with the nasty temper. They wanted the legend of the pilot so dedicated to gunning Jerry out of the sky that he did it after losing his legs.
There's a simple idea driving you through the film that if we had all been like Douglas Bader, if we'd all lost our legs and fought on, the war would have been over that much quicker.
Proof that men didn't have the monopoly on unbelievable heroism was to be found in Carve Her Name with Pride.
Action station!
Directed by Lewis Gilbert again, it starred Virginia McKenna as Violette Szabo, a young mother who left her family at home to serve behind enemy lines as a spy.
I don't think I really did look like Violette very much. First of all, she was dark and I was fair,
And they didn't want me to change the colour of my hair. They said it was fine as it was. It was more the essence, really, of the character they wanted, more than someone who looked the same.
Très bien, merci. Bonsoir.
Virginia was wonderful in that film, but she wasn't naturally that kind of character because she's very quiet and very laid back, and it was great difficulty for her to be running around with a machine gun and being a wartime heroine.
She's having to fire a Tommy gun at the Germans for the first time. It really brings it home to you just how frightening what she was doing is. Any sense of this just being, another, let's shoot Jerry picture goes out of the window. It's incredibly powerful.
Advising Virginia McKenna on the film was a real-life agent who, like Violette, had been captured by the Germans. Odette Sansom survived to tell the tale.
I had the very great privilege of meeting her, the real Odette, who virtually was on the set every day. I hate you. Although Violette's experience wasn't exactly the same, nevertheless it conjured up a picture for me of what these young women had gone through, the enormous courage they had.
Violette and two of her comrades were to pay the ultimate price.
We had to walk out and down a path to Barron Square, where there was a line of men with guns. We were asked to stand in a row, and that's where we were executed.
The three British agents, Denise Bloch, Lillian Rolfe, and Violette Sabo, are to be shot.
I had a message that they would like me, just before I was shot, to have a little half smile on my face. And I said to Lewis, I can't. I absolutely can't. It was so ludicrous to me to have been asked to do that. And he, thank God, absolutely understood what I meant. So I didn't have to smile.
Fire!
Carve Her Name with Pride told a tale of incredible courage, but war doesn't just produce stories of simple heroism. The Cruel Sea was made in 1953 and highlighted the valour of the British Navy. But it also focused on the kind of moral dilemma conflict can throw up.
Bearing 225, moving starboard 10. Starboard 10, sir.
I love The Cruel Sea a great deal. I think it's just a blinding film. There's something about that film that captures the terror of being at sea and the threat of being sunk. I mean, it was just a horrendous proposition.
What's it look like, number one?
Submarines, then. Can't be anything else.
That's a very truthful film about how terrible it was being involved in the battle at the Atlantic.
There's a German U-boat lurking under the waves.
Course 190, sir.
It's vital that Captain Eriksson, played by Jack Hawkins, acts decisively to protect his vessel.
What's it look like now, number one?
Any sailor will say that one of the worst times is when they know that for the greater good, you're going to have to do something which is probably quite terrible.
There are some chaps in the water just there. Well, there's a U-boat just underneath them.
The men he's spotted are British merchant seamen whose own ship has been sunk by the Germans. They think rescue is at hand.
You realise that in order to get the U-boat, he's going to have to mow down these guys left in the water who are on their own side, they're British people, and drop depth charges which will, in most likely, kill them.
Range 200.
And this sort of thing was happening all the time, people deciding that people have to die, often in large numbers, in order that other people will live.
Attacking, stand by.
Instantaneous echo, sir.
It just sums up this terrible moral dilemma at the heart of this war. You're fighting total war against a terribly evil enemy, and you have to do things like this in order to win.
Bloody murderer!
The cruel sea may have delved into the moral minefield that comes with wartime command, but 50s filmmakers fought the war with the comfortable knowledge that it had already been won. That hadn't been the case when battle was still raging and its final outcome was still uncertain. The 50s may be regarded as the golden age of the British war film, but the movies made between 1939 and 1945 played a considerable role in actually helping to win it.
It was very important. You know, it was the church, the shop, and the cinema. These were the focal points of where we went to when we were not either in the shelters or cowering at home listening to the radio.
As World War II broke out, there was a question mark as to whether going to watch films was an appropriate pastime during conflict at all. The cinemas had been closed at the start of World War I. It looked as if the same course might be about to be followed. In stepped one of the most influential film producers of the day, Hungarian-born Alexander Korda, founder of London Films and a close confidant of Churchill.
Alexander Korda went to the government the day after war broke out, and he said, "You're mad to close the cinemas. This is an amazing weapon. It's a propaganda tool. We can mobilise the population for total war as never before."
It's good to find the cinemas open again and the box office is busy.
Korda convinced Churchill that cinema could be as valuable a propaganda tool as smoking a big cigar and sticking up two fingers. Within months of the declaration of war, Korda guided patriotic documentary The Lion Has Wings into picture houses.
What is your idea of a holiday? This? Or this?
Speed had been of the essence in making it. 3 directors shot simultaneously, and it was completed in 5 weeks.
The Lion Has Wings was really a bit of a hodgepodge. It's various things pasted together, designed to show quiet British servicemen going about their duty.
Almost hidden in the darkness, the British fighters are waiting for the word to take off.
For the first time, it talks about the RAF, and it says to the people of Britain, the RAF is ready. You don't know much about the RAF, they're very young, you don't know much about aircraft, but don't worry, when the Luftwaffe come, the RAF are going to get them.
The message is simple. Aren't planes fantastic? Aren't Nazis evil? Isn't being British great? Not that we like to boast.
While our young men fought friendly battles, they marched in grim regimented hordes, stirred by false ideals, inspired by the blatant trumpet of power.
There is a strong suggestion that when the film was viewed abroad, it was considered embarrassing or hilarious. If this was what Britain was offering, then it was going to be a walkover.
Still, the chief use for our horses was exercise, not to carry cavalry.
It might have been a bit silly, but it was unambiguous and it was quick, and that's what the government wanted. But a more considered kind of filmmaking was to emerge when one of the directors of The Lion Has Wings, Michael Powell, teamed up with another Hungarian screenwriter, Emmerich Pressburger. Their partnership was to prove a key one in British film history.
In a way, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's films were the first films for grown-ups. You know, they were more than just diversions. They are about things.
Powell and Pressburger wanted to make films that would win the war, but they wanted to make films that won awards too, and that worked on their own terms.
They realised very early on there was no point in telling people things they already knew. You really had to have a strong message and an unusual, an original way of putting it over.
So they made films like this one, The 49th Parallel. The Ministry of Information said, "Boys, we want a film about minesweepers." And this is what they got. Nazis in Canada. It had a message for America too. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
I see a long, straight line athwart a continent. No chain of forts.
The US border is the 49th parallel. And the tagline on the film was about the 49th parallel, the longest unguarded frontier in the world. It's a very simple notion. They wanted to make the Americans feel like they were under threat as well.
On over them!
The film's basic premise of a band of Germans landing behind enemy lines was not a million miles away from the kind of subject matter a Nazi propaganda film might have dealt in. But as the Germans travel across Canada, the moral bankruptcy of Nazi ideology is exposed at every turn. This settlement of German emigrants they try to win over certainly aren't impressed.
Germans! Brothers! I ask you to join with me in paying homage to our glorious Führer! Heil Hitler! Heil Hitler!
The hope was that every audience seeing it would draw the same conclusion, that America couldn't afford to stay out of this war.
Most of us are Germans. Our names are German, our tongue is German, our old handwritten books are in German scripts. But we are not your brothers.
In 1943, Powell and Pressburger made the film that many consider their masterpiece. Not that everyone was so keen on it while it was in production. The life and death of Colonel Blimp was the story of 40 years in the career of an old-school military type.
Lieutenant Watson, or whatever your name is, you are not in Hyde Park with an audience of loafers. I am Major General Wynne Candy.
The life and death of Colonel Blimp, made at the time when London was being horribly bombed, is the most human story.
For years and years, they're writing and dreaming beautiful music and beautiful poetry. All of a sudden, they start a war. They sink undefended ships, shoot innocent hostages, and bomb and destroy whole streets in London, killing little children. And then they sit down in the same butcher's uniform and listen to Mendelssohn and Schubert.
The film was unmistakably pro-British, but it made Winston Churchill want to jump on a chair and scream.
Authority! Authority! How dare you, sir?
The army didn't want this old fart as a poster boy, and Churchill suspected that Powell and Pressburger might have intended Blimp to be a parody of himself with a moustache.
The minister said, I'm afraid you can't have our support in making the film. Why not? You've given us your support already. Well, the old man doesn't like it. Do you forbid us to do it? Oh, my dear fellow, don't say anything like that. This is a democracy. But don't do it, please, because the old man will be very cross.
I'll punch your head for that, young fellow. You young puppy, put him up. Take that. I'll teach you.
Churchill's government had fought very hard to try to overcome British feeling that the War Office was being run by blimps.
You know how many wars I've been in? I was fighting from the country when your father was still in bum afflictions.
The last thing he wanted was a film resurrecting this idea.
Drink up, Dale.
Gentlemen, your health.
One thing stuck in Churchill's gullet most painfully. Major Candy's lifelong friendship with a sympathetically portrayed German officer.
We can't ask you to be our friends if we rob you and humiliate you, too. That's how we all feel, eh?
Yeah. Astonishing that you could make a movie about the friendship of a German officer and an English officer in the middle of the Blitz.
Clive, if you let yourself be defeated by them just because you are too fair to hit back the same way they hit at you, there won't be any methods but Nazi methods.
The message from Blimp is, in fact, we have to drop these Edwardian views of fair play and actually accept the fact that we are fighting this tyranny never before seen on the earth.
The enemy is different, so you have to be different too.
One propaganda film, when it was released in 1942, seemed to resonate with just about everyone.
Must be an enemy destroyer, sir.
Right. Engage her.
At the end of In Which We Serve, audiences stood and cheered. The movie, just the actual transmission of it.
But, like Colonel Blimp, it had been a struggle to get In Which We Serve to the screen at all.
One of the ministry said, we don't want to make a film about how the Germans sank a British destroyer in the middle of the war with Germany. We want a film that shows how German ships were sunk by the British.
The leader of this wave is coming much lower, sir. He'll probably hit our mast.
The story of the fate of HMS Torrin was loosely based on a real sinking in the Battle of Crete.
Well done. We've got him, but I'm afraid he's got us too.
What's so appealing about In Which We Serve is under normal circumstances in Britain, we're a society riven by class. But at wartime, particularly during the Second World War, supposedly this Dunkirk spirit prevailed, in which we all put aside our differences and came together against this deadly foe.
The movie works as a metaphor, showing all levels of society pulling together aboard the ship of state. Its leader was Captain Kinross, played by Noel Coward, who directed the film too.
I'm afraid we're going over. Pass the word for the hands not of the guns to cast loose the Cardiff floats.
Noel saw in this extraordinary story of actually failure a microcosm of England in defeat, grace under pressure. And he realized that one of the great things about the English, which he understood very clearly, was that they could be good in defeat.
Coward had never directed in his life. He was completely out of his depth, but he was bailed out by a young editor who came along and gave the film a structure, a fellow called David Lean.
One of the things that he does is to introduce flashback for the story, so that you've not only got what's happening in the here and now, which is the ship has been sunk and the men are in the water, but also the men's home lives.
Here's the paper, dear.
It's nearly 1:30. I shan't have time to do more than look at the headlines.
There you are, then.
Don't look too good, does it?
Oh, you can't believe anything they say.
Britons having breakfast and drinking Christmas sherry. That's what the film's audience was fighting to protect. And look at Richard Attenborough here. His goggle-eyed terror would have certainly struck a chord with many an enlisted man.
Although the crew all behaved very well, there was one poor, pathetic little character who deserted his post.
There's no ambiguity here. Do your duty, or get a tongue-lashing from men like Noel Coward.
I suppose in a way it's gratifying to feel that out of a ship's company of 244 men, 243 have behaved as I hoped and expected they would. One man, however, did not.
Noel wrote a speech talking to the whole crew without naming the person concerned, but of course cinematically there was a close shot of me, said that one person on board did not behave as he should have behaved.
This man has only been in the Navy for 6 months. He's only been in this ship for 2 months. I feel that in that time I should have been able to make it clear to him that I did not expect and would not tolerate such behaviour.
It was the part that determined what I played for the next 10 or 20 years, the sort of quivering psychopath on the lower decks of Her Majesty's Navy.
The politicians might not have been keen on the film, but it did gain royal approval. They even visited the set.
Elizabeth, our present Queen, was 14. Margaret was 11. And we piped them aboard our destroyer. And Noel made his speech that he makes in the film.
There may be less than half the Torrin left. But I feel that we'll all take up the battle with even stronger heart.
It was an absolute classic.
Goodbye, sir. Goodbye, Hickey.
And by God, it was what we needed.
Kidding, Mr. Hitler.
But what about the war being fought on the home front? Today, this is the abiding image of the Home Guard. Can't imagine this lot forming an insurgency capable of garrotting a German army of occupation one by one, can you?
Whistle while you work. Hitler is at work. He's half army, so's his army. Whistle while you...
Your name will also go on the list. What is it?
Don't tell him, Pike.
Pike.
But that's what the British resistance would have been forced to do had the Nazis landed. And one film, Went the Day Well, showed how brutal it would be.
Whitsun weekend it was, 1942. As peaceful and quiet here then as it is now.
The director, Alberto Cavalcanti, had a background in documentaries, and it shows in this plausible take on the unthinkable. The film was adapted from a short story by Graham Greene. These men aren't British Tommies. This is Fritz in khaki.
Overslip like.
Begging your pardon for coming to the door like this, sir.
That's all right. Here's the billeting notice.
What for, sir?
Didn't the billeting officer warn you about our arrival?
No, sir.
At the time, there was very much the question of what would people do if the Germans came. Actually, government advice was pretty vapid about this. You know, they just sort of said, you know, stay put, which doesn't really answer very much at all. And this was really asking the question, what would the British people have done?
Major Hammond, I am Commandant Ortner of the 5th Parachute Regiment. Parachute? We are Germans, my men and I.
Though they're rather sleepy and they take time to wake up to the danger, once they are awoken, as it were, they act with extraordinary bravery. And it's a cliffhanger sort of film, but it's also a very brutal film.
This is what really might have happened to Dad's army. German invaders wouldn't have bothered putting names on a list. The implication was brutal. If they come, when they come, postmistresses and school teachers and land girls will have to learn how to kill.
The telephonist, who's a matron-like lady, who's very convivial, very jovial.
You don't say. Well, I'm broad-minded myself and...
throws pepper in the face of a German paratrooper. And as he's fumbling around, she's underlit with the axe. These people are fighting not just for their village, but for England. If these paratroopers set up this station, it will help the German invasion, which is due in a couple of days.
Hello, Upton. Hello, Upton.
It was so plausible. And the stabbing of the postmistress, and more horrific than any horror film.
Are you there? Hello.
I'm the girl that makes the thing that drills the hole, that holds the string, that drives the rod, that turns the knob, that works the thingamy-bob. I'm the girl...
The home front story, as depicted in the films of the time, was not just about the ever-lingering threat of invasion. The Second World War brought massive social change and increased social mobility, which was reflected in 1943's Millions Like Us.
Now you'll be working on bracing tube sockets to begin with.
Working on what?
One of the things that's fascinating about the film is this sense, similar to In Which We Serve, that all of the classes pull together.
How does it play?
Very well. Did you get home all right last night?
The film features a slow-burning romance between working-class factory manager Charlie and upper-class Jennifer, who's spending the war making aircraft parts.
Take you and me, for instance. Supposing we got tied up. Have you ever thought of that?
Did cross my mind.
They talk about getting married, but they discuss the fact that they come from completely different social classes, and if things aren't different after the war, then their relationship is doomed.
The world's roughly made up of two kinds of people. You're one sort and I'm the other. Over together now, there's a war and we need to be. What's going to happen when it's over? Shall we go on like this, or are we going to slide back? That's what I want to know.
The film leaves the question of what will happen to this couple hanging in the air. We don't really know because, in a way, the filmmakers don't know, and we don't know how the war is going to turn out, and we don't know how British society is going to turn out either.
One film about the home front that did have the benefit of hindsight was Hope and Glory. Almost 50 years after the events it depicts, it saw director John Boorman explore his childhood memories of life during wartime.
I am speaking to you from the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note.
I made it, as it were, a child's view of the war, but remembered by an adult.
Every single film we see on war is blood and guts, body parts everywhere. But there is another side to war, which is the human spirit. Recognise that, Dawn?
When they begin.
How we all clan together and really lift our spirits, stiff upper lip, have a good time, sing along.
Of music so tender.
That is not false. That is just as true as the other.
Didn't I see you with a soldier, Dawn? Just doing my bit for the war effort.
I won't have this vulgar talk in my house.
Sexuality was so rampant in the war. People were doing it wherever they could, in the air raid shelters and underground and all over the place. But desperation, getting it while you can, it frightened me much more than the war did.
I'm not talking about Mac.
For the young Borman, sexuality was hard to escape. The absence of most menfolk at the front meant he inhabited a very female world.
I was surrounded by sisters and aunts, and they always talked as though I wasn't there. So I became so familiar with the kind of way women talk to each other, particularly when they're undressed.
Sorry. Oh, that's nice.
I love the part where they're all taking everything off and they're in their underwear and there's nowhere for him to go except to look at pointed bras everywhere.
Oh, look! Oh.
Hope and Glory's take on World War II is a quirky one. One we can enjoy in the knowledge that everything turned out okay in the end.
Why did they have to go and do that?
The first audiences watching A Matter of Life and Death knew that too, but only just. It was Powell and Pressburger's last wartime film, hitting cinema screens in 1946.
It's about a World War II pilot who crashes. And it's incredibly moving, the beginning, where David Niven is going down and he befriends, over the radio, Kim Hunter's radio operator.
You Sparks, you said he was dead. Hasn't he got a shoot?
Cut the ribbons, cannon shell. June, are you pretty?
Not bad.
Can you hear me as well as I hear you?
Yes.
You've got a good voice. You've got guts, too.
It's got these allegorical figures, one of whom represents America and one represents Britain, Peter and June.
Hello, G for George. Hello, G. George.
They stand for the two countries, and the plot of the film is really not a concrete, a real love story, so much as a question. Will these two people and these two countries that they symbolize be allowed to develop their relationship in the post-war world?
So long, Bob. I'll see you in a minute. You know what we wear by now, a prop or wings.
David Niven's Peter has to bail out without a parachute. But in a typically fantastical Powell and Pressburger way, there's an administrative cock-up in heaven and he doesn't die. Not that he realises that at first.
I wonder where I report.
After Niven has survived jumping out of this flaming Lancaster, and then he's on this desolate East Anglian beach just walking along, and he thinks he's in heaven.
There's Niven walking on the beach, and there's a little pan there on the beach, a little boy playing the pipe, you know. It's weird stuff.
Where do I go from here?
Huh?
I'm new. I only just arrived. Where do I report?
And he goes up to the little boy and he goes, "Where do I go?" And the little boy goes, "What, do you mean the aerodrome?" And a Spitfire goes, and the shot of Niven turning round to look at the Spitfire go over his head, and the realisation that he survived.
So heaven waits. A rather 40s designer heaven at that.
Members of the jury, do not allow yourselves to be influenced by anything but the facts and by your conscience.
A heavenly court convenes to examine the case. Should Peter be summoned to heaven or allowed to live?
The counsel for the prosecution will take his place.
It answered a very specific need of the bereaved, because people were preoccupied with what happened after you died, because so many people had died in the war, and so many young people had died, and the sacrifice had been made, and people wanted to know, could they be in touch? Were they there? Is there an afterlife? What might happen?
The divine employee who screwed up zips from the monochrome afterlife to the garishly technicolor here and now to try to sort things out.
They played with style, like, you know, the real life was in colour, heaven was in black and white. They had escalators going up to heaven that took you up there.
It came about because of Michael Powell. If everyone was having heaven in colour and the earth in black and white, he'd say, no, I'll do it the reverse. He'd say, why should I obey the multitude?
I thought was just incredibly imaginative. I couldn't believe that it had been made in the 1940s, you know, because it just seemed so ambitious.
There's also another cameo for Richard Attenborough, whose recruitment shows that Michael Powell wasn't just a trailblazing director, he was persuasive too.
And he said, hello, how are you? Nice to meet you. He said, well, how much do you earn? So I said, I can tell you exactly, 7 shillings and threepence a day. He said, I think we can do better than that. He said, do you see that escalator there? If you're prepared to walk up that escalator, and then when you come to the top, look over the top there and look at this incredible world below, and simply say, it's heaven. I'll pay you that 10 times over, he said. I said, OK, 20 and I'll do it.
It's heaven, isn't it?
The parts that do work best are the fantastical parts. Visually, it's one of the great British films.
I could watch Matter of Life and Death on a monthly basis and never tire of it, easily.
The movie was screened as the very first royal film performance and was a critical and commercial success. Overseas, it was used to express the outlook of a new Britain emerging from 6 years of war.
It was shown at embassies in liberated cities all over Europe as a film which took a broad view of the evolution of historical relations between America and Britain.
Hello. Hello. We won.
I know, darling.
We did win, and we did win together, but victory in 1945 didn't see the world become a simpler place. It became ever more fractured, complicated and dangerous. The conflicts we faced during the 1950s weren't as clear-cut as the battle to rid the world of Hitler. They took the form of years of stalemate in Korea and a bloody nose in the Suez Crisis. And British war movies began to reflect this, becoming less about stoical heroism and more about military breakdown. Take Ice Cold in Alex, for instance. On the surface, it's a road movie, albeit a very sweaty and sandy one, about crossing the North African desert.
There was a bridge over the tank trap being blown up.
What do we do now?
It's a very interesting study. All those characters struggling to get that ambulance to Alexandria.
Don't just stand there like a high-parked floozy wondering how she's going to get through the winter. Get right on the back and push. And you stop grinning about your love life and come and help.
And they all have their baggage with them, and my father is, in charge of all of them.
I'm a drunk, you know that, don't you?
You were trying to get us away.
John Mills plays an alcoholic military captain who's clinging to the prospect of a cool beer to help him to his journey's end.
I'll tell you this. The next drink I have's going to be a lager. Ice cold.
Who they are when they start that journey and who they are at the end of that journey, that's what it's all about, I think.
You get in the cab, Tom, and I give the signal switch on.
En route, they pick up Van der Pearl, played by Anthony Quayle. He's supposedly a South African officer, but turns out to be a German spy. The others catch him trying to conceal his guilt by burying his radio transmitter. But he gets trapped in quicksand in the process.
Tom, quick, he's in trouble. Get the fan mats.
Despite his betrayal, he isn't left to die. Here, the human impulse wins out, and they save his life.
It's one of the first films that steps back from this overarching message of beating Hitler and beating Nazism and just talks about people.
He's unconscious, but he'll be all right.
You saw what was in his bag? He is a Nazi.
But as fellow travellers in the middle of the desert, there is no alternative but to press on together.
There's an extraordinary scene where they have to get over this sand dune and they've lost the power on the ambulance. So they figure the way to do it is to use the crank, crank by crank up the sand dune.
The stupid woman, that's me, lets the ambulance tumble down the hill. With me just getting out of the way. And the ambulance ran down the hill.
It's just devastating because it rolls down. It's devastating.
My fault. I should have had somebody on the brake. Well, let's take a little exercise, shall we?
With the spy Van der Pearl pulling his weight, they continue to work together to reach their objective. A beer in a favourite Alexandria watering hole. Before the military police arrive to arrest the spy, there's time for an ice cold in Alex.
Set 'em up, Joe. Set what up? 4 ice-cold lagers.
There had to be 6 takes of the scene in the bar, so Mills had to down 6 pints of lager in very quick succession. And he said he'd never had so much fun on a film set before then.
Worth waiting for.
We were all on these stools, and then Johnny got up from the stool, and he had wobbly legs because, of course, it was before lunch, and he had about 5 lagers, and he went, oh.
4 more, Joe.
Here's to you, man. You wish there were film stars now, British film stars, who they just build crazy premised films around, like there's an ambulance in the desert and a shifty foreigner, and they all want a beer. I mean, you know, imagine pitching that. But it's a great movie. The stuff they used to make, eh?
For some British filmmakers, the most important battles weren't being fought against the enemy, but between officers and men. This was class war. In the early 60s, national service had just been abolished, and people were gathering their rage against something called the establishment. The Hill was set in a North African military prison, starred Sean Connery and said, "Don't do what they tell you."
They've constructed in the middle of the square a hill made of rocks covered in sand, and the ultimate punishment is to be sent up and down this hill. Because it's sand, because the sun's bearing down, it's almost impossible to run up and down it more than once.
It deals with people in a position of power and the games that are played, and is a most extraordinary film.
See that hill? I noticed it as I came in. We built it special. 2 tons of sand and rock and a lot of labor and sweat. Something tells me you're going to get to know it well.
What happens in the hill is kind of like basic training taken to the nth degree. All the square bashing turned up to 11. All the bull and the bullshit taken to dreadful, dreadful extremes. I still get that outrage at the unnecessary nastiness and maliciousness that can come with having 1 or 2 stripes on your arm.
Here, Stevens, that's it. You stick at it, kidder. You're set for your ticket, you are.
For one young squaddy, the heat, exertion and humiliation of hours on the hill prove a fatal combination. Back in the cell, he becomes delirious.
They're all in a room together, and the one young person who's sort of been persecuted and is wandering up and down, and they're laughing at him, talking, and you're moving with him, and you don't know quite what's happening. You're seeing people laugh, and then the next minute he's on the floor, and wham, you hit the ground with him. It's told through the acting, through the sounds of the people talking, and visually just so strongly through camera work.
He's dead. The 4 that are left in the cell, who know that he's more or less been murdered by the screws, realise that they're not alone, that there are other people willing to back them up. And from that moment, the onus changes and the guards are on the defensive. I think that's the key moment in the film. What it reflects is the attempt by a younger generation to confront authority, particularly tyranny, and the sense that the individual, if he or she stands up for what they believe in, ultimately they will prevail.
Films like The Hill didn't celebrate famous victories. They suggested that the whole business of waging war and obeying military discipline was a pointless waste of time.
The rooms were so much colder then. My father was a soldier then, and times were very hard when I was young.
And that sort of nihilism was hardly surprising as the 60s saw the threat of a new kind of total defeat loom ever more menacingly. the worst military setback in history would be nothing compared with what the superpowers were capable of unleashing at the push of a button. America and the Soviet Union stared each other out, and all Britain's politicians could do was sit on the sidelines. Filmmakers kept busy, though.
Dr. Strangelove.
Dr. Strangelove was made in Britain by American director Stanley Kubrick, turning the prospect of nuclear Armageddon into biting satire.
Attack! Russia.
Oh. Dr. Strangelove, I think, survives as the great Cold War movie because it is about that thing that everybody feared right up until the end of communism, which was the Russians and the Americans going at it in a way that couldn't be stopped.
The base is being put on condition red.
Condition red, sir, yes. Very good idea. Keeps the men on their toes.
Group Captain, I'm afraid this is not an exercise.
Not an exercise, sir.
There's a mix-up. The bomb is sent on its way. It can't be stopped. The world is going to end.
Telemetry guidance computed into orange green.
Still, you got to have a laugh, don't you?
Never could the end of the world be so funny. Riding the atomic bomb out of the plane to the Earth brought a smile to your face.
Such a beautiful image, such a beautiful sort of succinct exposition of the madness of nuclear war. And I've used that image again and again, plundered it for my own cartoon work. It's an iconic image.
Meet again, don't know where.
Even though you knew, as We'll Meet Again plays at the end, that it's not really that funny.
Some sunny day.
Time, 9:13 a.m.
Peter Watkins's mid-60s docudrama on the nuclear threat, The War Game, was no laughing matter. The BBC certainly didn't find it funny. They produced the film but then refused to transmit it.
The War Game is perhaps the most powerful of the films that were made in the shadow of nuclear war.
This family couldn't afford to build themselves a refuge. This could be the way the last 2 minutes of peace in Britain would look.
As it was made in a kind of documentary style, as it didn't have a central character, as it didn't have a message other than the fact that this is going to happen to us if we're not careful. The fact that it was shot mostly like newsreel added much more to its power.
It is incredibly harrowing. It's not a Hollywood product, this is black and white, grimy. This is what the result of nuclear war will be like.
At this distance, the heat wave is sufficient to cause melting of the upturned eyeball.
The way he sort of threw modern reportage into the middle of a piece of documentary realism. Searing, dramatic scene, cheek by jowl with some sort of almost trite kind of television reporter wandering around the battlefield was absolutely outrageous for the time. Remains so to this day.
It's been estimated that a nuclear attack on Britain using approximately 160 single megaton missiles would immediately kill or seriously wound between 1/3 and 1/2 of her entire population.
As well as radiation poisoning and people dying in the street, you just got the breakdown of society. And we weren't allowed to see it, and we should have seen it.
After the BBC put a stop on it, this terrifying vision did receive a cinema release, but it would be 20 years before it was finally transmitted on TV.
It's interesting that it was allowed to be shown in the cinema, but not on television. I suppose there was a feeling then that people needed to be protected at home, which still exists to a degree, whereas if people are adult enough to go and pay and sit in a theatre, then they can handle it.
But the shadow of nuclear annihilation found its filmic expression in different ways. In 1969, Spike Milligan had his say on the subject.
The Bed Sitting Room was one of those surreal movies where people try to juxtapose humour with the notion of Armageddon. And I think it worked really well.
I feel I am not boasting when I remind you that this was, without a shadow of a doubt, the very shortest war in living memory. 2 minutes, 28 seconds, up to and including the grave process of signing the peace treaty fully blotted.
It had initially been a stage play co-written by Milligan and John Antrobus. The transfer to the screen was overseen by Richard Lester.
The tone of the film, the elements of surrealism, were things which were common to Spike and were common to his stage version, as well as his natural bent in comedy as to mine. Even though you're trying to produce metaphors for disaster, when you put a pile of boots 15 feet high, and they're real boots, in the clay pits of St. Austell, and there was nothing green. There were no trees, no birds, no grass, no bushes. Everything was grey and brown.
Good evening. I mean that most sincerely.
Whatever the gags you do, they're still sitting on a pile of boots which have all those other elements of Auschwitz and whatever.
I'm over here! So you are!
The film's bizarre premise is that radiation doesn't kill people, it changes them. Ralph Richardson turns into the bed sitting room of the title. Here he's undergoing a medical examination.
Breathe in. In.
Rita Tushingham stays pregnant for 18 months and sees her family transform before her eyes.
Her mum changes into a chest of drawers.
Night-night, Mum.
And her dad into a parrot. And, I mean, there is a madness about it. Spike Milligan.
Good night, Dad.
In the end, she gives birth to a beautiful, normal baby. And then the birds start to sing and the grass grows.
Come on, Sarge.
This seems like a happy ending, but it's bittersweet.
This is BBC Television. I have great news for the country. Great Britain is a first-class nuclear power again.
Faced with the prospect of the kind of war that really would end all wars, the bright young things of the 60s became ever more vocal that this was a bad idea. But at the same time, something odd started to happen on the streets. Vintage military style was hijacked as a fashion statement.
It's interesting to look back on the footage in Carnaby Street in the 60s, wearing military uniforms, Sergeant Pepper. That look was based on military uniforms. The kids are wearing them and saying, no, they're now peace uniforms.
Filmmakers, too, wanted to kick against their elders, and they did that by revisiting the battlefields of the past in search of stories with contemporary resonance about class, race, and the futility of war. Zulu is the story of the Battle of Rorke's Drift in 1879. 150 British soldiers taking on 4,000 Africans with very pointy spears. It's a film that divides opinion.
The sentries report Zulus to the southwest. Thousands of them.
It's one of those films, as a black person anyway, that doesn't date well for me. It almost still has the aroma of films where you just sort of wheeled out the black extras to be shot.
But others found the Zulu forces in full flight inspirational.
The power of the Zulus, particularly when it's expressed through their singing and their stamping, stays with you. It so impressed me, the movie, that we all went over Barking Park and played Zulus. Why we didn't want to be Welsh Fusiliers, I don't know, but we didn't. We wanted to be Zulus.
The Zulu extras were descendants of the actual Zulus who fought at the battle, and they were led by Chief Buthelezi, who's, of course, famous in this country for his role in the end of apartheid.
Zulu's an amazing film. It's like a British Alamo, and we don't have an Alamo story in our history, although it turns out we do with Zulu. What's great about it is its blend of ingredients. You've got unfortunately, the faceless hordes of Zulus, and then the Jolly Welshmen with their gallows humour, and then the Toffs, and then Michael Caine, which means it's a good British film.
Michael Caine starred opposite Stanley Baker, whose brainchild the film was.
That's my post.
Up there.
Baker supported the idea of casting the then unknown Kane against type.
Who said you could use my men?
People of lower income or class or whatever you want to call it, they can't get your attention, and so they move their hands a lot to get your attention, and they speak very quickly in case you won't listen, you know. But just taking it to an extreme, the powerful people, they know you're going to listen, and they pause and they stop and they talk. And they don't do this to get your attention. They have their hands behind their back. And I watched Prince Philip. He always had his hands behind his back because he knew someone was going to open the door. You know, I mean, Cockney has his hand out there in case someone slams it in his face. As you'll go, wait a minute.
Oh, well. I suppose there are such things as gifted amateurs. If I may
Are you questioning my right to command?
Oh, not your right, old boy. Never mind. We can cooperate.
There's an obsession with class in the film, and it reflects a sort of Britain in the 1960s. At the beginning of the film, we see massive social chasm between Michael Caine's character and Ian Baker. There's a schism between them. By the end of the film, the stress of battle and the shared experiences means that they begin to get over that, and they form a much closer bond. And that perhaps reflects the fact that Britain felt in the 1960s was beginning to come out of the kind of rigid caste system that had benighted this country for so long.
Well, we haven't done too badly.
Whenever I re-watch Zulu, I'm always surprised by the anti-war sentiments that run through the film. Seen in the cold light of day, it's actually an anti-war film.
Damn you, Chard! Damn all you butchers!
All the way through, there's this running theme, the futility of war.
That's right, boy, you sleep. I'm damned if I could tell you why.
As the 60s progressed, anti-war attitudes started to harden as peace-loving hippies evolved into war-loathing demonstrators. Violent protests against Vietnam provided the backdrop when radical director Tony Richardson chose to retell the story of the biggest military cock-up of them all.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
The charge of the Light Brigade was set in the Crimean War, but had just as much to say about the class war. Charles Wood penned the keenly observed script.
10,000 a year out my own pocket I spend to clothe them. A master cutler sharps their swords and I keep them tight-stitched, cut to a shadow. Good. If they can't fornicate, they can't fight. And if they don't fight hard, I'll flog their backs raw for all their fine looks.
Charles Wood just wrote an absolutely fantastic script, and it's a class. It's a very class, I mean, in both senses of the word, film.
Watch your places! Hand your blazing! And slash into them! Take them to draw my out of my legs!
Captain, my compliments to Sir George, and will he stop those confounded you-halloos? My horse expects to put up a fox any moment.
I think that questioning of authority for a movie made in 1968, that's against the backdrop of the politics of the 60s, and it's the end of deference.
It'll be a sad day, Harry, when England has our armies officered by men who know too well what they're doing. Smacks of murder.
I think it sums up a modern British attitude to war, which is it's stupid, it's futile, it is not a heroic film. They choose to make a film about the most absurd and futile episode in British military history.
Outflank those guns now, damn you! Not charge them! He's turning into the wrong valley! Oh, yeah!
Despite the spectacular scale of the filmmaking, Tony Richardson's vision was not generally appreciated. The critics largely hated it.
Tony nailed it, and they didn't like it. It was too near the knuckle. But you look at it now, it's a minor masterpiece.
You have lost the Light Brigade. I will not be blamed.
This is the end.
Your Majesties,
My lords, gentlemen, ready when you are. Take your places, please, for the ever-popular war game. Complete with songs, battles, and a few jokes.
It was probably inevitable that the challenging filmmakers of the 60s would get round to tackling the biggest story there is of stubborn generals and pointless slaughter. Oh, What a Lovely War was about the Great War of 1914 to 18. But this was a war movie with a difference. It was a musical.
Oh, What a Lovely War is in the great tradition of almost satirical look at war. We can do this. You know, we can show the horrors, but we can also do it in a sort of slightly self-mocking way.
Merely making a sort of observation.
We Germans are a moral and industrial people.
The film was based on Joan Littlewood's early 60s stage musical. Actor John Mills and writer Len Dayton worked up a film script and approached Dickie Attenborough to direct, much to his surprise.
Yes.
Johnny, you must be out of your goddamn mind. I've never directed anything. Come on, Dick. We know you understand theatre, you understand characterization, and you adore music and comedy. What more do you want?
Goodbye, goodbye. Wipe the tear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know I'll be tickled to death to go. Don't.
Because of its root in radical British theatre in the 1960s, it does have an edge to it.
We are the ragtime infantry. Sweet Hannah's my sweet Hannah.
I love that film. The church parade starts singing these sort of unofficial words, and it's all about the unofficial words given to hymns and things, and it's just wonderful.
His holy bride, and from his lap was a bloody rotten lot of the ragtime infantry.
They've all gone. They've all been killed.
Working counter to the musical element was a very realistic depiction of trench warfare, and the film's two worlds of realism and fantasy collided in its breathtaking finale.
It's got the most vivid ending. It starts with this soldier. In the fog he finds this sort of thread, this red thread, and he follows it out of the war. He comes out into an open field, and there's this just pullback, which is absolutely marvellous. It just brings tears to your eye thinking about it.
I said to the production designer, I want to start on a single cross, and I want the camera to pull back until it is full of 16,000 crosses.
And when they ask us, and they're certainly going to ask us.
Sea of crosses, this sea of crosses just fills the screen, and it is the most vivid image I can ever think of.
Making cinematic sense of war stories is a motif that runs throughout Richard Attenborough's career. He served in the RAF. He did a tour of duty in classic wartime movies, and for the last 60 years, he's refought those battles again and again as actor and director, and he's still at it. Coming to cinema screens soon will be Closing the Ring, a story of wartime love and loss, especially the loss.
Hey, at the left! Come on! Wilbur?
Oh, no.
But there's one Attenborough war movie that occupies a pivotal position in the history of British cinema at war. It was made in the late 70s and was the swan song of the World War II epic. It was A Bridge Too Far.
A Bridge Too Far is the last great British war film with the ambition to really show the big events in World War II.
We're going to fly 35,000 men 300 miles and drop them behind enemy lines.
It is one of the most dramatic stories.
It'll be the largest airborne operation ever mounted.
It was lavish, it was grand, it almost cost as much as a real war, and it told the story of a failed attempt to break through German lines in occupied Holland. They brought in the big guns in the special effects department and in the casting department too.
Dirk Bogart, James Caan, Michael Caine.
It had almost every star available.
Edward Fox, Elliot Gould.
All crammed into this film. The poster for the film was just basically a stacked shot of all of the actors' faces. So in other words, yes, it's about the Battle of Arnhem, but really it's about these people.
Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins.
But all the famous faces don't make it seem like an all-star 70s disaster movie. This isn't The Towering Inferno in khaki.
Take cover! I've been to Arnhem lots of times, and I parachuted there from the same aeroplane in the same gear. And that was absolutely terrifying. So I've had a tiny glimpse of what those people went through, and I think that film really does show you the bravery of those people.
American movies of this period preferred comic strip action to historical accuracy, but not here. Attenborough wanted it to be powerful, but he also wanted it to be right. Several of the generals depicted in the film were enlisted as advisors to help. But for one star, the realism became too close for comfort.
Get moving. Get moving.
We didn't tell him the extent to which he would set off and all hell would break loose.
He said action, and we started going, and the whole countryside blew up. He had 14 cameras on that shot. They'd been rigging it for 2 days. I thought it was a real tank behind me with real guys in it, and that went up. I said, why didn't you tell me? He said, look at the shot. That's how Vandeleur must have looked. And he said, I did. Vandeleur was standing there.
You don't know the worst. This bit we're on now, yes, it's the wide part.
Vandeleur says to me, he says, I like you playing me. I said, why is that? He said, you're taller than I am and funnier.
Another of the film's lead actors found little to laugh about.
Hold your fire!
The only insight I got from the movie is that war is terrible, ferocious. There's nothing romantic about it at all. There's no glory in it. It's horrible. That was a synthetic war. That was a movie war. What it must be like in reality must be unimaginable. The horror.
That film is hard to watch, for me, but it definitely is something that people should watch because it's all about true grit, determination, courage, against all odds.
That's beautiful, son.
And if A Bridge Too Far is anything, it's a tribute to all of them, whichever conflict they've served in. It's an incredible film.
Two lovers and a code to break. Kate Winslet stars in Enigma next on 2. And you can see the Dam Busters in a brand new digital format in a cinema near you. Log on to bbc.co.uk/British Film for details.